let me take over for a while. So you can rest while I tell you a quiet little story about love, lies, and how humans have never quite figured out how to date without making it weird. Tonight's episode: ghosting, gaslighting, and gallantry. A sleep story about the weird evolution of dating etiquette. Yes, because before Tinder, people still vanished without a trace. Before gaslighting, lovers were still manipulating. And gallantry? Well, let's just say it was mostly PR. So get comfortable, breathe, and let your mind drift to a world without smartphones, but with the exact same emotional chaos, where ghosting meant riding off to war and never writing again, where breadcrumbing happened via candlelit letters, and where people managed to make romance incredibly awkward, long before emoji existed. Now, if you enjoy these strange little sleep stories, you can support the madness over at ko-fi.com/napmax. And while you're still awake, hit like, subscribe, or comment your weirdest dating story in 3 words. Let's confuse the algorithm together. We'll start in the medieval world, a place of chainmail, arranged marriages, and songs that took 3 weeks to deliver. But don't worry, there will be no heartbreak tonight. Only dry humor, soft voices, and a gentle slide into sleep. This is Napmax Sleep Stories, and you're listening to Ghosting, Gaslighting, and Gallantry. Boring dating history for sleep. Let's begin. In a time when love had rules, strict ones, written not in emojis or late night texts, but in bloodline, class, and cattle. In medieval Europe, dating as we know it didn't exist. There was no seeing where it goes. You either married to survive, or you were locked in a tower waiting for someone with a good family name and questionable hygiene. Romance, if you could call it that, was a performance. A heavily choreographed series of gestures designed not to attract love, but to maintain honor. And property. Imagine it. You're 15, your father is negotiating with another father, and the only thing you've said to your future spouse is, "May God be with you." Because that's how courtship worked. With distance, restraint, and the constant looming presence of your extended family. As for women, well, you were either a bargaining chip, a nun, or very good at pretending not to cry in public. Flirting was a sin. Desire was dangerous, and falling in love was a luxury for the songs, not real life. Instead, young men were encouraged to prove their devotion through grand, painful acts. Duels, pilgrimages, writing poems so terrible they'd make a Hallmark card blush. And when a knight finally approached his lady, it wasn't to ask for a date. It was to kneel, swear loyalty, and hope she'd drop her handkerchief. Maybe. But here's the secret. Courtly love wasn't real. Not in practice. It was theatre, emotional cosplay, a way to express feelings that were otherwise too dangerous to admit. Because in a world ruled by land and legacy, love was the least important part of a relationship. Still, they tried. They carved initials into trees. They wrote letters by candlelight. And in between all the rules and repression, somehow, people still fell for each other, even if they weren't supposed to. And speaking of letters by candlelight, in the next chapter, we'll sneak a little deeper into the world of romantic deception, where music, ink, and flowery words became the tools of lovers and liars alike. Now picture this. It's midnight. You're in a cold stone room, wrapped in silence, scribbling your heart onto parchment with a quill that's more dramatic than necessary. This was medieval flirting. Letters. Endless letters. You couldn't just say, "Hey, thinking of you," You had to write something like, "My soul burns with longing like the torches of Hades," and hope it didn't get intercepted by a monk. Romance was a game of secrecy and performance. Poetry was currency, and anyone with a lute had power. Minstrels wandered from castle to castle, singing songs commissioned by desperate lovers too shy or too married to say it out loud themselves. And of course, these songs were rarely subtle. They spoke of aching hearts, cursed love, and beauty so divine it caused nosebleeds, metaphorically. But here's the twist. While love letters and music painted a picture of noble affection, reality was usually messier. Because behind every wax-sealed confession, there was often manipulation. An attempt to gain favor, land, or simply entertainment. People lied about their feelings, about their intentions, about their age, their status, even their number of surviving teeth. The past, it seems, had its own version of catfishing, only slower, and with fancier handwriting. Still, there was something undeniably romantic about it all. The effort, the suspense, the idea that someone would wait weeks, sometimes months, for a single reply, folded carefully with pressed flowers inside, even if it was all based on carefully crafted fiction. Even if, once they finally met, they realized they had nothing in common but a shared talent for exaggeration. But sometimes, that was enough. And if not, well, they could always disappear. Which brings us to the next part of our little story. The ancient art of vanishing without explanation, closure, or even a second glance. Sound familiar? The art of vanishing. Before we had the word ghosting, we simply had absence and silence. The kind that echoed louder than any slammed door. In a world without read receipts, people disappeared the old-fashioned way, on horseback, with no intention of writing back. Sometimes they died. Sometimes they just chose not to reply. You could blame the war, the weather, or divine intervention. Nobody could prove otherwise. Disappearing wasn't cruel. It was practical. When communication moved at the speed of a donkey, vanishing didn't feel abrupt. It felt inevitable. A lover might go on a pilgrimage and never return. A suitor might be called to court and forget you existed. Or maybe they joined a monastery because celibacy was somehow easier than commitment. And unlike today's digital cutoffs, these exits were permanent. There was no second account. No accidental like 5 years later. Just space and doubt. And the quiet, creeping suspicion that maybe you were never that important to begin with. But here's what made it bearable. Everyone knew the rules. No answer was an answer. You didn't spiral through 3 therapists wondering what went wrong. You lit a candle, wrote a sad poem, and hoped the next one had better timing. In many ways, it was a cleaner cut. No dots typing, no late night stalking, just gone. And yet, even in their vanishing acts, people still craved meaning. They read signs into silence, omens into absence. Because no matter the century, humans hate unfinished stories. And in love, we rarely get a satisfying end. Still, they kept trying. We always do. And in our next chapter, we'll watch how the idea of love itself was reshaped. Not by passion, but by contracts, cows, and family strategy. Because nothing says romance quite like a legally binding agreement. Love, in many parts of history, was far too important to be left to the lovers. Instead, it was handled like livestock. Weighed, measured, negotiated. In fact, the phrase love match would have sounded utterly ridiculous to most medieval ears. as if feelings had anything to do with it. Marriages were arranged by families, not for pleasure, but for power. Land needed to stay in the right hands. Bloodlines had to be protected. And daughters, well, they had to be strategically placed like expensive chess pieces. A good match was one that benefited the household, not the heart. You might be 12, he might be 38, but if your dowry included 2 goats, a field, and social elevation, congratulations, you were in love now. The ceremony would be performed, the union sealed, and whether or not you found each other attractive was considered deeply irrelevant. Of course, there were whispers of rebellion. Some fell in love anyway. Secret glances, late-night meetings under fig trees, but those were dangerous stories, meant for poets, not daughters. So people adapted. They learned to survive in loveless marriages. They found meaning in duty, or distractions in private. And when they needed comfort, they turned to saints, or spirits, or that one field hand with very nice forearms. Still, this system worked in its own cruel efficiency. There was clarity. You knew your role. You knew your partner might not like you, but they probably wouldn't leave, which, by modern standards, sounds like both a nightmare and a strange kind of security. But love, real love, was always looking for cracks in the structure. Moments of softness, letters smuggled under cloaks, poems written with trembling hands and hidden in prayer books. Even when everything was arranged, someone, somewhere, was always falling in love with the wrong person. And sometimes, that person fell back. In our next chapter, we step into the flickering light of the Enlightenment, where reason began to rise, and emotional manipulation learned how to wear a powdered wig. The Age of Reason. A time when thinkers believed that logic could solve everything, even love. Emotions were considered messy, unreliable, something to be understood, not surrendered to. So naturally they began to overthink everything. Philosophers wrote essays on desire, scientists tried to quantify attraction, and suddenly the heart became a puzzle to be solved, preferably with charts and footnotes. But beneath all the powdered wigs and polite conversation, something else was happening. Emotional manipulation was evolving. In the courtly days, you simply withheld your handkerchief. Now, you quoted Rousseau. You reasoned someone into doubting themselves. And if you were truly gifted, you made them feel irrational for feeling anything at all. It was, in many ways, the birth of gaslighting. Though no one would have dared call it that. They were too busy discussing moral sentiment and sipping expensive tea. Romance became a performance of virtue. You didn't just woo someone, you proved you were the intellectually superior choice. The more composed, collected, and emotionally distant you were, the more desirable you appeared. Sound familiar? But here's the tragic twist. People still wanted to be wanted. Desperately. So they bent themselves into rational shapes to please partners who praised moderation over passion, who admired stoicism but secretly craved fireworks. And when the fireworks came, they called it madness, hysteria, illness of the soul, anything but love. It was a time when restraint was romantic, when letters grew longer but feelings became harder to name. And it laid the groundwork for the most emotionally repressed dating era in history. Yes, we're heading there next. To the land of corsets, curtsies, and unspoken suffering. The Victorians are calling. And they've brought lace. If the Enlightenment taught people to analyze their feelings, the Victorians taught them to bury them under 14 layers of fabric and forced politeness. Desire was a dangerous word. So was ankle. You didn't flirt, you glanced, briefly, then looked away and thought about it for the next 4 months. Romantic expression became a language of symbols. A fan held just so. A glove dropped with purpose. A rose sent without a note. Because saying what you actually felt was far too indecent. And when someone did speak of love, they did it in a trembling whisper, as if declaring affection might summon a scandal, or worse, emotion. Letters became essays. 3 pages to say, I miss you. 5 to say, I'm slightly fond of your presence. Touch was sacred. A brush of fingertips at a ballroom was enough to cause a full-blown psychological crisis, usually followed by poetry and possibly consumption. It was, in short, a time of exquisite repression. Women were expected to be pure, fragile, and slightly ill. Men were expected to be noble, distant, and emotionally unavailable in a heroic way. Anything outside that dance was considered deviant, so feelings went underground. They hid in novels, paintings, and private journals locked with brass keys. Lust became illness. Heartbreak became melancholia. And love, real love, had to be suffered for. Because if it didn't hurt, was it ever truly Victorian? But underneath all the rules and sighs, people still longed to be known, to be touched, to be chosen, not as a social obligation, but as a soul. And sometimes against the odds, they found each other, even in the thick velvet of silence. But when war came, the veil was torn. Love became urgent, quick, messy, because suddenly, time was running out. When war enters the room, love forgets its manners. Gone were the letters soaked in lavender. Gone were the glances, the protocols, the slow-burning rituals of courtship. Now, love came fast, urgent, frenzied. Because you never knew if the person you kissed tonight would still be breathing the next week. Young men, barely more than boys, went off to fight with lockets around their necks. Inside, a photo of someone they'd only just met. A girl in a borrowed dress, half smiling in the corner of a dance hall. Wartime romance was built on hope and fragments. Stolen hours. Promises made too quickly. Eyes memorized in candlelight before the train pulled away. There were letters, of course. Endless letters. Written in trenches, dropped from planes, clutched in hands that hadn't held anything soft in weeks. They spoke of longing, of futures imagined, of things left unsaid, and sometimes they arrived after the sender didn't. Back home, lovers waited, watched the door, prayed for silence or news, depending on the day. For some, love deepened. Distance made it sacred. Each reunion was a miracle. For others, the war ended, and they realized they had nothing left to say. Because war changes people. It alters the shape of hearts. And sometimes, the only thing two lovers still had in common was that they'd survived. Yet the stories endured. Of love against the odds, of kisses on platforms, of promises carved into rings and remembered in song. But as the world shifted again, as peace returned and normalcy stumbled back into place, another change was brewing. The roles were cracking. The rules were fraying. And a new kind of lover was stepping into the spotlight. Cool, detached, deliberately elusive. The fuckboy was coming. And this time, he had vinyl and aftershave. Peace returned. The bombs stopped. The letters slowed. And the world collectively exhaled right into a cloud of cologne, leather jackets, and casual heartbreak. Because with the mid-20th century came a new kind of suitor. Cool, elusive, effortlessly cruel. He didn't bring flowers. He brought a cigarette, a knowing smirk, and zero emotional accountability. He wasn't a knight. He wasn't a poet. He was complicated. And somehow, that made him irresistible. The modern fuckboy was born. He showed up late, left early, and never explained why. He made you feel like the center of the universe, until you weren't. Then he'd vanish, only to reappear 3 weeks later with a cryptic message and a playlist. And here's the thing. The world let him. Because somewhere between ration cards and rock and roll, we decided that aloofness was sexy. That mystery was depth. That if someone didn't text back, it meant they were busy being fascinating. Cinema didn't help. Neither did pop music. The brooding, silent type was everywhere, suffering beautifully, loving recklessly, and hurting everyone in the process. And women, they were told to fix him, to understand him, to be the one who could finally unlock his heart, as if love was a puzzle box, and emotional detachment a badge of honor. Of course, not every man was a villain, but the culture changed. Commitment was passé. Vulnerability was weakness, and ghosting got an upgrade. Now it came with mixed signals and late-night radio. But behind the bravado, the same old longing remained. To be chosen, to be held, to be told, this time, it's different. Spoiler, it rarely was. And then, technology happened. Which meant no more train stations, no more perfumed paper, just screens, swipes, and a new set of rules no one understood. In our next chapter, we step fully into the digital age, where red flags come in 4K resolution and love lives in the cloud. And so we arrived. Not with a love letter, not with a kiss, but with a push notification. Dating became digital, condensed, streamlined, gamified. Swipe left, swipe right. Don't overthink it. Profiles replaced first impressions. Bios replaced conversations. And photographs, filtered, cropped, curated, became the new love letters. You didn't meet someone through friends or fate. You met them through an algorithm that believed in compatibility based on your Spotify history and a mutual love of sushi. Romance was now a marketplace, and you? Just another product, looking for good lighting and the right caption. Red flags no longer came whispered from worried friends. They came in text form, blatant, brazen, and often ignored. We called it breadcrumbing, benching, love bombing, as if renaming toxic patterns somehow made them trendier. And ghosting? Oh, ghosting went pro. Now it came after 5 weeks of perfect chats, after playlists, voice notes, and I've never felt this way before. Then, nothing. Left on read. Online, but never again with you. No explanation, just absence. But here's what made it worse. Unlike the medieval vanishing acts, you could still see them. Their stories, their likes, their life unfolding without you in it. Closure became a myth. Disconnection became performance art. And everyone pretended they were fine. Because showing care was weakness, and being chill was currency. So we swiped, again and again, searching, matching, waiting for someone to say something real in a world full of wide, but deep down, under all the digital dust, we still wanted the same thing we always had. To be seen, to be chosen, to not be the one left wondering. And when that didn't happen, we sought closure. A text, a reason, an answer. Which brings us to our next chapter. the heartbreak industry's favorite myth. Let's talk about why closure is a scam. We crave it. That final conversation, that clean ending, the moment where someone sits us down and says, "This is why it didn't work. This is what I felt. This is what you meant." As if clarity could disinfect pain. As if words could undo absence. But closure, real closure, is rarely something we get. It's something we build out of the rubble someone else left behind. In the past, it was easier to lie to ourselves. He must have died. She was taken by pirates. The letter got lost. Today, you see them online. You watch them like your own private ghost. Still alive. Still posting. Just not talking to you. And that hurts more than any sword or rejection letter ever could. Because now, we don't just lose someone. We watch them move on in real time. Yet we still ask, why? Why did they change? Why did they stop calling? Why did they tell you they weren't ready for love and then marry the next person 6 months later? But here's the uncomfortable truth. Even if they told you, it probably wouldn't help. Because what we really want isn't answers. It's reversal. A chance to go back to when it still felt safe. When the story still made sense. Closure is a story we write to comfort the part of us that didn't get to say goodbye. It's not something they give. It's something we give ourselves. Not quickly, not cleanly, but slowly. With time and tea and sometimes questionable life choices in between. So if you're lying awake tonight replaying a conversation that never happened, wondering what you did wrong, know this. You didn't need their final message to be worthy of peace. And maybe some stories aren't meant to be finished. They're meant to be outgrown. Which brings us to our final thought. After all the history, the heartbreak, the drama, why do we keep trying? Why do we still hope? Despite it all. The letters that never came, the glances that meant nothing, the texts left unanswered, the silence that filled the spaces where love used to live. Despite every awkward date, every almost, every beautifully worded excuse, we still hope. We swipe again. We open apps we promised we deleted. We look across crowded rooms, wondering if maybe, just maybe, this one is different. Because something in us refuses to give up on connection. On the idea that someone, somewhere, might actually see us, choose us, and stay. And maybe we're fools. Maybe it's madness. But it's also human. Because no matter the century, whether we wore armor or denim, wrote poems or emojis, we've always longed to be understood. To be loved in a way that feels like coming home. No performance, no strategy, just warmth. Even if it lasts a moment, even if it ends, we still hope. That's why we keep writing love songs, lighting candles, sending messages at 2 a.m. It's why someone in 1452 wrote a letter on goatskin parchment, and someone today still checks if their message was seen. The world changes, the tech improves, but the longing, that stays the same. So if your heart's a little bruised tonight, if you're lying there wondering if they'll ever reply, remember this. Your story doesn't need their ending. You're allowed to rest without understanding everything. You're allowed to sleep without fixing it. You're allowed to hope, quietly, softly, secretly. And with that, let the past dim, the silence soothe, and your body begin to drift. You've just listened to Ghosting, gaslighting and gallantry, a sleep story about the weird evolution of dating etiquette. This is Napmax Sleep Stories. Thank you for being here. If you enjoyed this little heartbreak lullaby, support the dream over at ko-fi.com/napmax and leave a like, subscribe, or comment with your favorite dating red flag disguised as a green one. Now close your eyes, forget the last text, and sleep. We've got you.